Hello and welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. This is the show about all things making music. Today, I have a special guest. I have Dan Policar. Dan is a local guy we've actually met in person. It's one of the few people actually I've had on the show like that. And Dan is a Grammy-nominated touring musician, songwriter. He's doing music for video games. He plays in Sean Paul's band, the BaddaBanz. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, close enough. Unless you
BaddaBanz?
speak patois, that's about as close as we get.
Okay. Yeah, so you're a touring musician. You've been all over the place. And that is obviously an issue right now here in the spring of 2020. We're all kind of locked in our houses. And I'm sure we'll get to that. But anyway, I think it's going to be a cool talk, man. And we've been trying to work this out for a while. I'm happy we're getting the chance to sit down and do it. So welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It's a pleasure to be on your show. And I have to apologize to you for screwing up the scheduling of this the other day. That's not cool, and that's not how I roll.
Don't worry
and I
about
apologize for that. So it's a pleasure to be on your show because I actually have listened to quite a few episodes now, and it's been educational.
Cool. Well, I get it though. I mean, this last 2 weeks for me, I've left the house twice to go to the supermarket, both times, walk the dogs, but it's this weird, blurry, long day. I don't know what I did this morning compared to yesterday morning, and it's just very strange.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I tell people, there's really no historical precedent that anyone living would have remembered, right? So The Spanish flu epidemic, 1918, 1920, they'd have to be 110 or 120 to even remember it, right?
Right.
So how many 110-year-olds are we in contact with that vividly remember the last worldwide pandemic that was... I mean, yeah, we remember swine flu, H1N1, and a few others, but I think that one is probably the closest thing that we can remember to the whole world kind of shutting down,
Yeah, and those didn't change my day at all.
No, you would still go on to work, you would still... go about your normal day. I would have still played all my shows that I was playing, and for now, it's what has been about 2 weeks, I guess, or longer.
Yeah, for me,
I'm not even too sure.
For me, 2 weeks ago was the last day we had school, and
so the Friday before this
Friday
is
the
Thursday
13th.
Today. Friday the 13th.
How fitting.
So funny enough, I flew that day to play one last show in Florida, and I was scared. I was like deathly afraid of flying, and I was like, I don't even want to go. And I did it, and it was good. The spirit is, once you get on stage, I don't know if you do a lot of live performances and stuff, but there's just something about being on stage that kind of changes and removes all your fears. Well, for me, it removes all my fears and anxieties. For some people, it creates them.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying.
It just kind of removes it from me. It's like, okay, and afterwards I'm like, yes. It's almost like, being in the gym where you get your endorphins going and you feel good and all these things. That's kind of the way I see it for me being on stage. There's a lot of anxiety in the preparation leading up to it, but once you get on stage and go, that's it. We're ready. And it was weird because I got that feeling and I was happy afterwards, but then as I came home again, just being on the plane, being in the airport, I'm like super paranoid. It's just the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced, and I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that,
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. I know I would have been a little worried at that point too. I knew once they closed my school, that's a big deal, because that's going to disrupt things. There's a lot of kids that need to be watched all of the sudden, and
right. And my wife is at a school also, and it's the same kind of situation. They closed hers. She hadn't been closed because Suffolk County, where you are, right? You're in Suffolk County?
Yep.
Closed before Nassau. No, I lied. Nassau County closed before Suffolk County, and she works in Suffolk County. Mm-hmm. So you must work in Nassau County then.
No, I'm in Suffolk County. Those are the two counties on Long Island.
Oh yeah, for people who don't know.
Yeah, yeah, we could get really local, right? You go to Jimmy's Pizza.
We live like probably 10 miles from each other or something like that. Not very far.
Yeah, yeah. my school got closed that Friday because somebody in the district, one of the children at the elementary school had a parent that had it. So they said, that's it, we're closing everything. And then it was like, I think Saturday, the Nassau County executive said we're shutting down. And then shortly thereafter, like the next, might have even been that day, but then Suffolk County followed. And
yeah, I remember that.
yeah.
And, it's wild because this isn't something that I was totally blindsided by the same way I think a lot of people were. I went to Australia in January with Sean Paul. We had like a 2-week tour there, and it was already being talked about. When I got on the plane, I came back, I think maybe one of the first couple of days in February. But when we got there, they were already in masks. Like in Australia, everybody was already wearing masks at the airport. It was already like a thing, but it hadn't really spread out of China just yet. Or it probably had, but nobody realized the consequences that it had. So in a way, I kind of was like, okay, let's see what happens. And I remember before we went, the engineer that I talk with in the group, he was like, man, I don't know about this. I don't know what's going on. They were supposed to do some shows in other parts of Asia, and they ended up not doing them. And I don't know if that was because of the virus outbreak or because of the potential. And this was in January. Nobody was talking about it here, really.
Yeah.
And even a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, we were talking about, oh yeah, we're going to play the NBA, but there'll be nobody in the audience. There'll be no crowd. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, you know what? No, we can't even play games.
Yeah.
And now it's like, you know what? We probably shouldn't even really leave our houses. So it's wild. And let's tie in the musician side of it other than just the touring. So the average musician, I would say that's, making the majority of their living or all of their living off performing is basically finished right now. Like there's almost zero that they can do. I mean, there's people now doing live stream concerts, and that's cool and things like that. But if you're, a musician that plays like a horn, are you going to do all saxophone solo music for a concert? It's different for somebody who plays the guitar and sings, or even plays the piano, but it's going to be really tough. And then, I would say that the biggest thing that we can do as a community of musicians and music lovers is to be supportive and encourage those people, because I've seen a lot of things online that says, hey, well, this is why you should have an emergency fund and this and that. And you know what? That's not what people need to hear right now. What they need to hear right now is encouragement. It's like, how are we going to get through this? How are we going to, there's a lot of people that just can't see that. They can't even figure April 1st is coming, right? That's a lot of people have to pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever. How are they supposed to do that with zero income? Literally zero income. My income went from whatever it was to zero that Sunday. I think that was the last day I've earned money performing music.
Wow.
So I'm in the same boat, I'm not paranoid or worried about it for me personally, but I'm worried about it for all the guys that I work with and guys that I've, grown close to, and girls, not men and women, I should say, not just guys, but it's going to be a really, really stressful time. And it's sadly, as when we're recording this, it's not even the worst of it that's started yet. It's going to get worse, which is kind of an unbelievable thought.
Yes, it is. It's, like you said, unprecedented. It's, because we didn't know, what do we do? We don't even have like, oh, well, last time we did this. There's no
book.
And so many things, like you just, that attitude is insane for someone to say, well, this is why you need to, I mean, that's just heartless.
But I've seen it. I've seen it more than once. And it's kind of like, you know what, guys, like these guys are, for lack of a better word, they're screwed right now. So telling them that they should have prepared, that's not going to help. We got to find another. We're not at a prevention stage right now. We're at a mitigation stage.
Right.
So we got to figure out how we're going to help people, right? And I think for musicians and entertainers, the biggest thing I think that we can do to help is to be positive and encourage people and show, things that are of humanity as opposed to business or, proving how great you are. It's like, no, we pretty much just need to do things. Well, we can't open doors for old ladies anymore because we don't want to actually be that close to them physically, but it's that kind of thing. Like, hey, what can you do? Can you deliver food for somebody that can't get it? Can you, can you send, I don't even know listen, I haven't even thought this through myself, but I'm just trying to say to myself, okay, this is what my job is right now. My responsibility is, obviously, number one is you need to protect yourself and your family. But number two is you got to protect yourself as a human being. And that involves protecting the rest of humanity as best you can and being positive and, sharing things that are going to help people. I wish I had a bunch of inspirational things to say other than be inspirational and helpful, but it's just not something. I'm as stuck as the next person. I realize there's no precedent for this. I don't know. Is it an immediate thing? I saw a million messages between probably that Friday or I think the day before Broadway went dark, the 12th. I think it was Thursday the 12th. Broadway went dark. When Broadway went dark is when I had kind of my realization, like, okay, every musician I know is now totally screwed because the Broadway guys are the most consistently.
Yeah.
They're almost like a day job, right? They're almost like a 9-to-5 job as a musician. And after that closed and they get locked out of being able to work, like, we're all in the same boat and we're all toast, So people are jumping on. You see a lot of, hey, all of a sudden I'm offering online lessons and I'm offering this and I'm offering that, and which is great. The upside is you may have the opportunity to learn from and study with people that you never would have before. The downside is a lot of these people are not teachers. So that's something that I know in my intro we didn't talk about me teaching at all, but this is something that I started doing when I was maybe 17 or 18. I started teaching, so it's a long time. We won't have to go into how many years, but it's been a long time, over 20 years, I think. And it's something that I've always enjoyed doing, and music production, right? I always think of music production, especially when you're working with artists, as it ends up being teaching. It's like the weirdest thing. I'm like, man, I wanted to get away from teaching for a while and just focus on doing songs and records and things like that. And as I got into the studio with more and more people, musicians or artists, I realized, my job is actually just to kind of like, not always teach them, but like pull the best out of them. So it's almost like at times you have to trick people into doing things that are going to yield better results than they're even aware they're capable of. Or you're just showing them something that they maybe hadn't thought about before as a part of the process in the studio. So a singer, for example, like I've worked with some amazing singers and songwriters, and it almost never fails with songwriters, especially if they're in the booth just kind of writing the song on the spot or in a studio writing the song on the spot. They'll sing some little piece of a hook and then they'll never come back to it again in the song. And I'm like, so you just glossed over like the gem of your whole record and you never let me hear it again. Like, where's my repetition? I want that. You came up with it. I'm just telling you it's got to happen more than you originally wanted it to happen. So that's something that happens all the time, and top-notch singers. Sometimes they're singing, and I don't know if you've worked a lot as, like maybe an engineer or a producer sitting in a chair where you're not touching anything. Your role is literally to guide. No, that's not the style.
No, that's not what I do at all.
Yeah. So I've probably sat in pretty much every chair, whether I'm the musician. I'm never the singer, thank God. The producer that's like a Rick Rubin where I'm not touching anything, or a Quincy Jones that's not really touching anything, or more the who's the best one that I could use to describe that just does everything? I would say Timbaland, but I know he doesn't even do that a lot of the time. Somebody that just does every little nuanced sound.
Yeah.
Maybe Benny Blanco, somebody like that. He's doing damn near every little nuanced sound. and each of those roles is a little bit different. So sometimes I think in making those type of records, the people that you're working with don't always understand that. Now, if you're making only solo records, you're the whole show all the time, it's very different, right? So have you worked a lot with, like, do you ask other people to collaborate on your music, or is it always a solo effort kind of thing?
It's mostly a solo effort, but there is the occasional thing. I find a lot of what you're saying is very helpful for me when I almost like divide myself and I have that like producer in the chair.
You're changing your role. You're switching hats, literally.
Yeah, it is. It's like constantly going these different ways of thinking, but this one side of you that is sort of like trying to guide the artistic vision for the person that's trying to make it. I think like that person in the chair to just say like, hey, you just had that was the hook, you know?
Right. And that's very tough because when you're trying to do that for yourself, that's really tough. When you're trying to do it for somebody else, it's a little bit easier because it's almost like when you're playing or when you're practicing, let's put it, when you're practicing music as a performer, right? Everybody will tell you to record yourself practicing. Now, why do you need to record yourself? You heard what you just played, right? You did, but the reality is you were focusing on executing the performance, and therefore your brain was partially occupied doing the performance, right? So you weren't completely able to focus on just listening. You weren't able to put all your brain power into just the listening back of the music. So they say record your practicing. That way you know where your mistakes are. That way you know what you thought you heard, but then when you listen to it back, it's like, oh, the tape doesn't lie. They say that all the time. The tape doesn't lie. Like, true. That's what I really sounded like. Oh, I thought I sounded like this. No. For me, it's good because it goes both ways. Sometimes it's like, oh, wow, yep, not going to do that one again. Or it's like, oh, that actually sounds better than I thought it did at the time, So it can go both ways. It's not always a negative, but it's a tool that you can use to strengthen, yourself as a performer, but also as a producer, it's a little bit different because if you're playing anything in drum patterns, guitar, whatever, you're going to listen back to it right away, right? Mm-hmm. So do you play any of the stuff live, guitar, or you do, right? You play guitar.
Yeah.
So if you're playing guitar, you might have to do 5 takes of the part, right? And you're just like, nah, that wasn't it. Nah, that wasn't it. Nah, that was. And then you play it and you're like, oh, that was it. So it's almost like taking that production thing into the practice room as a performer, right? It's similar to that. But I know one thing that we had talked about before, and this is something that I didn't realize how many people struggle with. And you were saying it's like finishing records, right? Because you had your was it Finish February that you just finished?
Yeah.
So, and that was your whole goal, was to finish an EP within the month?
Yeah.
Roughly? Okay.
Thank God it was a leap year.
Yeah, you said you used every hour of every last minute of
the 29th.
Well, it's funny because I actually have some stories of similar things, but I wasn't trying to finish. I was literally getting called at the last minute. But yeah, that's something I would love to hear more about from you because and from other of my students, I actually teach like a music production and recording class every Monday, and it ends up being like anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10 of us, and it kind of ends up being me kind of just guiding the guys along, and then finding out where certain shortcomings are or weaknesses are, and then just illustrating small points to try to help with those things. And I was asking them, like, do you guys have trouble finishing songs? And I realized after, I think I saw you talk about it, or you were talking about either on your Twitter or in one of the previous podcasts.
Yeah, it comes
with
up
one
a
of the
lot.
guys that with one of the guys that you had on. And I was just like, wow, okay, so that's clearly like a big issue that's coming up a lot. And I never ran into it, I guess, because I was always under the gun, literally, not literally, but I was always under a deadline. Like, there was always deadlines for what I had to do. And I kind of, I remember hearing the line that, forget the song, but I think it's on College Dropout, the Kanye West album, where he's talking about doing 10 beats a day every day or 5 beats a day every day. I forget exactly the quote. But he talks about doing that, and I was like, okay, 5 beats a day, huh? And I was doing tracks all the time. It's like, yeah, the way I do tracks, I can't just crank out a hip-hop loop, 8-bar loop 5 times a day. That's not how I produce music, right? But at the same time, I still was trying to hold myself to a standard of, you got to get tracks out. There's no excuse. It's you're either going to succeed or you just might as well give up and go flip burgers. What are you doing? You got to do this. So the question I guess I would have is what do you think causes the root causes of why you're not able to finish records?
I think what it is a couple things. The deadline thing is huge, right? So that
helps you finish records.
If my deadline would have been February 15th, I would have got it done February 15th.
Right.
But it's like when you were in school and you had a paper due that on Friday, you waited until Thursday night and then you figured out what you needed to do and did it. I think there's no deadline for most people making music, and often for me too. There's a deadline for other things I do and that stuff gets done, but the artistic stuff is there's no deadline, and there's also not a clear thing it has to be. There's not a clear message all the time. I often come down here and I'm like, let's see what happens, where is the creative wind coming from today? And I like doing that, but a lot of times it doesn't go anywhere. There's no point to it. So I can't make decisions about what kind of sounds to use or what instruments to play.
Well, I love that, because to me, what you just described, if I did that, I would never be able to I wouldn't even be able to start a record. Forget about finishing a record. I wouldn't know where to start. So one of the things I always tell people, especially with the guys that I work with on Mondays, is to eliminate your options. Mm-hmm. Right? You have literally, when I started making records, and I say records very loosely, I was probably, 13 or 14 or 15 or whatever. They are terrible. Mm-hmm. I have them recorded. I can prove to you how bad they are. But even back then, I kind of understood the concept of what I was trying to do. Whether I was able to execute it or not is another story. But
what were you working on? What
back then?
Yeah, what were you recording on?
Oh, you mean equipment?
Yeah. Was it
so?
I was the same way. I had a 4-track tape recorder.
Oh, I never even had that.
I was so limited. I had a guitar and a mic, so I got a lot of stuff done because I had only limitations.
Right, right. So, well, I guess that's one of the things, right? So I had this Yamaha PSR student keyboard. Mm-hmm. It had 4 pads on it that you could record onto. There was no sequencing. There was no way to sync up the beats. I had no MIDI sequencers. I didn't even really know about that stuff. I just played parts onto it. I played the drums by hand, recorded them with no quantization, with no step sequencing, nothing. So the beats were all off. Stuff was off. It was terrible. But the idea was there, right? Mm-hmm. The general, the gist of what I was trying to achieve was there. So I was able to capture the moment. Whether that moment was executed properly is another story, and it wasn't at the time. And then I eventually got this keyboard called the Yamaha DJX, which is I should buy one again. They're awesome. Mm-hmm. It was made for probably, this is well before the MPC 1000 was even a thing. Nothing was really made specifically for guys that were doing hip hop and stuff other than the MPCs, which were out of the price range of a lot of us, myself included. And I was actually working on DAWs pretty much, not from the very first, but pretty early. I was working on Cakewalk Pro Audio 6 or 7, eventually 9. And do you ever remember trying to run a VST? I don't know if you're probably a little younger than me, but do you ever remember trying to run a VST synth back in the day?
Well, I came into it in 2005. I'm 39.
Oh yeah,
just
you
so
missed
you get
it.
the picture.
Oh, you're so okay. No, we're about the same age.
Yeah, but I came from the world of rock bands, playing guitar. So like
Gotcha.
MIDI, I didn't know MIDI until my mid-20s.
You didn't touch that stuff. Yeah, you got a drummer, you got a bass player, you got a guitar player and a singer, and let's go.
But a lot of what you said about recording your ideas, I see that in that work. I had a band in particular where none of us were drummers. We were 3-piece, and we were 2 singers, 2 guitar players, and a bass player, but we'd rotate the drummer. And we recorded everything we did. And we worked within our abilities. And by listening back, we were like, oh, that was cool. That was cool. Oh, I didn't realize we did that. 'Cause especially with us, we're really trying to I'm just trying to keep the beat because I can't even hardly do that.
You're not going to play all kinds of Neil Peart Rush stuff because you're just struggling just to get the beat stay there, right?
Yeah, so that concentration on the performance was obviously there, but then we could listen back and be like, oh, that actually works. You don't need to do all that. And that's been something I've taken with me even in like my electronic based stuff. When I perform by myself, I record everything and then I listen to it in the car, and a lot of my songs develop that way just by jamming on the arrangement and fooling around. And I don't have lyrics yet. I'm kind of just blabbering nonsense words, but then you start to hear syllables and sounds that work together. And
I think a lot of top songwriters do it that way. Like Billy Joel, there's a video of him, I think it's with James Lipton way back in the day, maybe 15, 20 years ago they recorded. I remember him talking about something he referred to as vowel movements. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he just kind of started humming stuff and singing almost gibberish, and then he would put the songs together. That's cool.
I like that approach because it helps you figure out melodies. It helps you figure out like rhythms and where consonants sound should go and where the long vowels go. And then once in a while you just say something cool. And that becomes the thing. Think about that
process. You just kind of nailed the whole songwriting process, right? So if you go to any music school and take any music study and this and that and the other, like what's the premier instrument of all time that they refer to?
I guess piano?
No. It's kind of a trick question. It's the voice.
It's the voice.
The voice trumps everything. Like, we've created all these other things, right?
Yeah.
But the voice we were all born with.
Right.
Some of us better voices than others. Some of us are just born with, crappy singing voices, and there's nothing we can do about it even with all the training in the world. But the voice is where it all starts, and your mind has spent so much time on the voice because obviously you talk and things every day that a lot of times the translation between your brain and your mouth, your singing, whatever, you can get ideas out. Like you could sing a drum part, right? Mm-hmm. That you're thinking of. Can you go execute it? Maybe. I mean, you might be able to. I can't play the drums at all. So if I sit down at the drums, it's going to sound like crap, but I know what it's supposed to sound like in my head, and maybe I can sing it. And I think that's part of the process that I've tried to integrate into what I do. And basically, I'm trying to always use my head. So all my ideas should start here. They shouldn't start here. They shouldn't start in an instrument of any, for me. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not going to be true for everyone. Some people are inspired by things and whatever. But for me, it always starts in my head. So I'm actually 9 times out of 10, I know what it is that I need to make. So I know how to start putting it together in my head. By the time I get to this place, if I haven't forgot the idea completely, which happens too, I can kind of record it. Or you can sing it into your phone and just keep a note, like a voice note of that idea and later come back to it, which I'm sure you do that stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite thing about my phone.
Right. It's great. But
let me ask you real quick. You're primarily a piano player, right?
I mean, I'm only a piano player. Okay. I can't play anything else.
So everything starts in your head, like the chords, melodies. You're not like playing on the piano and that's cool. I like that.
Generally, no.
Wow. Okay.
It can happen that way, but what usually happens that way is if I'm running through some plug-in or some keyboard and I find a cool sound,
Yeah.
that sound will inspire something as opposed to actually like something
I
I'm
see.
playing. I'll just hear the sound. I'll just be hitting one note, to see what the sound sounds like. Oh, that's what you could do with this. Boom. Or
Right.
it's a melodic thing, or it's a whatever, it's a pad or whatever it is, and that might inspire something. But generally, no. The other way too is to sometimes hear things wrong. That happens with a lot of songs that I've done. Like, I remember I was watching TV half asleep. I think I was in Uganda, in Africa, and I had to write a record for a jazz singer. And I wasn't going to play on the record. I wasn't going to produce the record. I was just going to write the songs. And I heard some Raphael Sadiq thing come on the TV, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So basically, I shut the TV off almost instantly because I had the idea in my head as soon as I heard it. And I was able to, it wasn't really his song at all. It inspired me to come up with something else that related to it. And if you heard the songs, you'd be like, what the hell is this? This has nothing to do with the Raphael Sadiq song.
Right.
It just happened to jump into my ear. And so I said, okay, this is what I need to do to execute this. So I guess if you really want to know the truth of it, the reason I play is because when I was producing as a kid, my abilities were kind of more limited. I mean, I played piano as a kid. I come from a legacy. My mother's a piano teacher. My uncle plays saxophone and clarinet and all these things. And my grandfather's a musician and arranger. He plays a bunch of instruments. My mother plays and sings, whatever. So it was kind of a thing where I was like, I can't execute what I'm hearing up here. So I need to learn to play better in order to produce better. Which then eventually the playing kind of overtook. I was like, well, I have jobs working as a player, so I might as well keep just, doing this and then keep producing at the same time. So I kind of, in a way, I use the playing as an excuse, the practicing as an excuse to try to get better at production. And it helped to a degree. I think I took it a little too far and ended up as a performer and doing production. But I would say, the majority of my income comes from performance, not so much from production. But that was the original inspiration. It's like, dude, I got to practice so I can play these ideas that I have. Because if I could play these ideas, it would be cool.
Yeah.
And, I don't even know if I knew that there was a proper job for a producer. Of course there was. I think 2005 or so, 2004 or 5 or so is when I probably started like doing music professionally, when I graduated college and all these things. But yeah, man, that it was really production that, inspired me to become a player. So I guess in a way the ideas were kind of always in my head that way. So I tried now to formulate things before I have to go execute them or finish them. So I'll kind of go through a lot of things in my head before I get into a studio, like just doing random average daily tasks. Hey, I'm going to the post office. I'm washing the dishes. I'm, getting ready for bed, whatever it is. I'm kind of slowly formulating the ideas. And this is just one of the ways that I think it's helped me to not have that problem of finishing tracks, because once I can start it, it's good. But sometimes I want to get to the point where I don't have to think that much. But like you said, if you come down and look for inspiration, it's going to be a long day for me anyway. It's like the only way I could do that is if I'm listening to other people's music or watching TV or movies or something that has kind of like a cool, interesting sound or score or whatever, some audio clip that inspires me somehow, right? So I find it best to do a few things. Number one, try to formulate the idea in my head first. And number two, use like inspiration and sources, right? So if you're writing, I mean, I don't think your music is generally aimed at the top 40 from what I've listened to, right? It's not pop, Taylor Swift-ish kind of stuff, which is what I actually love, as weird as that sounds. I love the top 40 stuff for the most part. And I kind of think of there isn't exactly a formula, but there is. Like a friend of mine told me this, like, how do you write a hit song? Do you have any idea how you make a hit song?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just have never really felt like doing it. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I can tell you this. I have 0 Billboard #1 songs.
Mhm.
So you could take my advice as complete nonsense, or anybody's advice as complete nonsense, but I could use some case studies and argue this point. The best way to make a hit song, rewrite a hit song that's already been written, right? So Puff Daddy / P. Diddy kind of made his whole career doing that early on, right? And sampling and all these things. And you make a hit song by rewriting a hit song. So if you hear, now unfortunately we're hearing a lot about people getting sued for stealing and this and that and the other. But at the end of the day, that's kind of almost what you have to do, right? So if you can't hear, and my favorite songwriter, if you can't hear some of the songs that he's written and where the actual influences come from, it's kind of a surprise, because they're all hit songs because they're based off of other hit songs, right? And there's a lot of nuances in there, I think, that are underappreciated by most people. It's like, oh, top 40, that's bubblegum. Anybody could write that. I strongly disagree.
I do too, yeah.
I strongly disagree with that statement.
Well, making
there are
a
some that are
catchy
exceptional.
song isn't easy,
Well,
I mean,
I think making a catchy song is easy. Making an amazing catchy song might not be so easy.
okay.
Right? You can make a catchy song, just repeat something really annoying for a long
Yeah.
time. That's going to be catchy. It's not going to be good, but it'll be catchy.
Right.
Well,
Well, that's the funny thing that happens real fast with something that's catchy and repetitive, is it can get annoying. There's a very
it
fine
happens
line.
with hit songs.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you heard the Macarena back in the day, I remember my local radio station saying, yeah, we're not going to play that anymore. Everybody's annoyed. Nobody wants to hear it anymore. And they were right. It got overplayed. Yeah. There's plenty of songs that have been overplayed over the years. But, those are all these little pieces that I've studied of stuff that probably most people don't want to study, or they don't think it's necessary to study. And I think let's bring it back. Let's try to bring it back to, how do you finish songs? Well, I think the finishing is how you start. You have to do a lot of things. You have to, number one, eliminate options. Take options off the table, right? That's usually the first thing I do. Like, I often start with the BPM. I'm like, I might hear it in my head, but I'm like, okay, I need to tap this out because I need to know what BPM this is. So, all right, there's the BPM. Now I just eliminated a bunch of steps already. Okay, then I'm going to use what kind of sound am I going for? What's my goal, really? I guess for me it becomes easier because a lot of times I have a fairly clear goal. Like, let's say I'm going to make a song for Sean Paul. Well, that eliminates a lot of things right there already.
Right.
So, number one, the most important thing when you're working to make music for an artist is study their catalog. If they have no catalog, then you need to hear how they sound and compare them to something that sounds similar or something that you'd like to create a sound for. You have to use material that's already out there. You can't just pull from the void. It doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? It's not going to have any kind of appeal where people are going to want to hear it if you don't do that. And I think that's something that happens with a lot of people where they say, well, I want to make music for myself. I argue if you want to make music for yourself, you don't need to ever really overthink it, because nobody else should be listening to it then, right? You're making music for the audience. They can interpret your song however they want. You have no control over that.
Yeah.
Once it's released, right? So you might say, hey, I made this chill out study music, but somebody might be working out to it at double time, right? You don't know. So, and it's their choice, and it might give them a feeling of sadness. It might give them a feeling of nostalgia. It might give them a feeling, who knows? It's not really your choice. That's the listener's choice. So let's try to go back to this. So we start by eliminating options. BPM is a good way to start. So if you're working for a specific artist, you're kind of studying their catalog or studying the sound, even specific things like the key of the song, right? Like, I know you I'm trying to remember which episode it was, but you mentioned something you were listening to a neighbor play something and you were like, yeah, I don't know, I wouldn't use that chord progression, that's kind of weak. And I came up with, and I'm going to try to do these like really cool chords.
Yeah.
And then you heard it next day or something. It's like, wait, that's really cool.
Yep. That's happened a million times.
So you're kind of like judging yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You got to use the judge of yourself to a degree, but you can't let it like beat you up.
Yeah.
Right. I use it all the time. I listen back to something. I'm like, yeah, that's crap. I'm just going to have to toss it and start over. This just isn't going to work, you know? So you got to be honest, but you also want to use it to say, that's good, but if I tweak these two things, even though these are a real pain in the ass, tedious tweaks, if I tweak these things, it's really going to change the end product for the better. Mm-hmm. Right? So I guess in a way, I'm always using my ear and listening in my head first, as opposed to here first. And I don't know, that may be some concept that's more advanced, because I studied music since I was a little kid and I went to music school and I have all these, all this time spending with classical music and jazz and formal training, ear training that may not be accessible to most people that are producing music. Guess what? You don't really need it, because I've worked with guys that have no idea about any of that stuff, Sean Paul included. Like if say, hey, Sean, check out this G7 sharp 9 with the raised fifth. Like Sean is going to look at me and be like, yo, we don't care, brother. You know what I mean? He's going to just tell me like, dude, just play the chord that's in my song. I don't care about all this other crap.
Right.
So there's those are a couple of things. I think there's other things too. And I think eliminating your options, like I can see in your background, you got a bunch of keyboards there and a bunch of synths and stuff. Like, do you ever say to yourself, okay, I'm going to limit myself to one of these, or I'm going to just use these two things, or
those are the most productive days.
There you go.
You know?
So you have to change. Yeah. You have to take whatever options you have, you got to whittle them way down. Mm-hmm. Right? And I have a million synths and a million keyboards and a million VSTs and plugins, and I have too many in all honesty. And I find myself not using a lot of them because I know a few of them. That's the other thing too that helps, getting to know your tools really well. So instead of continuing to buy more, just get to know the ones that you have really well. Yeah. Because I think the bottom line is you don't need crazy stuff now. You know, kids with a laptop, kids with an iPhone. Somebody produced a record for Drake on an iPhone, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't tell me that you need any crazy equipment to make records. It's just not true. You need an ear for sure. You know, I don't think anybody can make stuff on an iPhone or whatever. But the tools that you have in front of you, just make the best use of them that you can. You had the creative, what is he? The creative director for BandLab on?
Yeah.
I forget his exact title, but he worked for BandLab, and BandLab offers a free DAW. Mm-hmm. They own Cakewalk. And I downloaded it on my PC, and I was like, oh my God, this is a full-featured DAW with VST synths, EQs, compressors, literally everything that back in the day was super expensive, and it's free and it's full-featured, and there's literally no catch. And I don't even want to be an advertiser for Cakewalk because I don't use the software anymore, like I did back in the 90s and early 2000s. But it's free. So,
the tools
let's roll. Let's go. Let's just remove the roadblocks and make the songs we want to make. So I think the tough part probably is for you is the fact that you don't have an artist that's always in your ear saying, where's my record? You don't have, other musicians who are saying kind of the same thing, or you have to record them and you only have this limited window of which to get the best possible take out of them. So those create challenges, I think, that somebody who has those things is not going to have the luxury of, because this has happened to me a lot of times. When I get the chance to work with artists on records, I don't have time. They don't give me any time. It's like, oh, hey, by the way, we need this record by yesterday. So I don't know if I probably can talk about it because the album came out and they didn't use my record. The day before Fabous's last album, Summertime Shootout 3, I think, came out, they called me and said, "Hey, we need you to do this record." I'm like, "Okay, when do you need it by?" And I literally said, "When do you need it by? Yesterday?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, I figured." And so I made this song. It was some kind of a recreation of a Stevie Wonder thing that sadly we didn't use. They ended up not being on the record. But the record label sent me, I finished the thing. The record label sent me all the paperwork within a week. And a week before, I wouldn't even thought I was working on the guy's record. So I had zero time to prepare. It was literally due that night. I mean, he messaged me maybe, I don't know, noon or something that day, and by 9 o'clock that night, I had to send the track. And that's happened to me with him many times before. Soul Tape 3, I want to say. We were rushing to get out before Christmas. And so Christmas Eve at like 3 or 4 in the morning, I'm working on, well, I guess that's Christmas Day by then. I'm working on tracks to send them to mix in the studio. I'm in Long Island, they're in the city. They're mixing tracks. That record came out at Christmas Day at noon.
Wow.
Or I might be off by a day. Either it came out Christmas Eve at noon or Christmas Day at noon. Like, so I had no time. I had to get the record done, or they're just not going to use what I did. And I ended up playing on a bunch of stuff on Soul Tape 3. I think it was the track that he did with Ryan Leslie. It's called Lay Down. I had to replay a lot of stuff because they didn't actually have the proper 2-track or stems or anything. So they just asked me to do that. And I did that. I remember doing that in my old house, old apartment, like super late at night. And my wife was like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you I'm like, "I'm trying to finish this record. They need this thing out tomorrow." Funny. So I'm making it work.
Yeah.
So that being under the gun like that helps. I think probably gave me an education that most people sadly don't get. In terms of, like, hey, we got to get this record finished, right? So that, and I think also too, for me, not just necessarily impressing the clients, but just showing the clients what you're capable of. For me, like whether it's Fabolous, whether it's John or Brenda Romero, whether it's Sean Paul or whoever, like if you say you can do something to somebody like that, and you can deliver immediately, like sooner than they expected, it's always a win situation, right? You're going to get more work because they're like, yeah. Well, I mean, why do studio musicians get work? Studio musicians get work because they can do the job in the shortest amount of time possible. That's what it boils down to. Because for a fact, you want to go into a studio and record, it costs you money every hour that you're there, right? There's no unlimited, oh yeah, it's just going to be, I don't know, give me $50 and you can be here all day. It doesn't work like that. Right. A day in the studio is not cheap, right? So time is money. So the studio musicians, they get work because they can get that job done faster than anybody else. That's the way I look at it. And producers, similar. They're not so much under the gun like a studio musician has to get it right in one take, but they're expected to do things quickly, So I think for me that helped a lot. Not actually doing my own music, but always having a deadline. That's sometimes like an unrealistic deadline. It's like, hey Brian, I need you to do like a 3-minute song that's kind of chill in the key of B flat, and I need it by like midnight. 7:30 now. I need it by midnight. Can you do it?
Hold my beer. Here we go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hold my beer. Let me go. And I mean, that's what it boils down to. So I think sometimes you got to throw other things to the side and just jump in and go and hope for the best, right?
Well, that eliminates a lot of other things too. I mean, aside from the fact that you've just told me I'm in B flat, I'm in this chill, whatever I got to do.
Right. Well, I may not tell you B flat, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. You've given me parameters, and I also know that I don't have an hour to pick out the perfect kick drum.
That's right.
I can't.
So you're gonna got to go with what you know.
Snare drum for the next 45 minutes.
Nope.
That's not a good use of time. And
nope.
It's really like, let's go. Like if you watch like those 10-minute challenges, Fact TV does. They call them
No, I
against the
haven't seen 'em.
clock. It's pretty.
But I get the idea.
Yeah, it's cool. It's just like it's the gun to the head. Make a song now. And
They want you to make a song in 10 minutes?
yeah, make as much as you can really in 10 minutes. And you'll see
I
like
don't know how much of that I could do.
yeah, it's a ridiculous challenge, but
That's a little too much under the gun for me.
they're already shooting
to make
at you.
good music.
Yeah, well,
Sometimes you need the chance to listen back and absorb and step away and come back.
that's
and
what
even
I was
in
gonna
4
say.
hours.
They don't even listen to it sometimes. They're just
No, that's no good.
they're just
No,
going
that's no
for
good.
it.
No,
And,
that it can't work. That's not
sure.
music. I don't know what that is. That's an exercise.
It's an exercise, yeah. But I
Yeah.
think and I wanted to ask you actually about this because I kind of am under the feeling that quantity is really important to just get into the habit of like doing as much as you can rather than like belaboring. It's different if you have a job and you're expected to put forth like something of a high caliber, but as someone that's like learning the process, I think the idea of just pumping stuff out can be really effective because you go through all the steps of the process instead of just getting stuck on that 8-bar loop and then just being like,
Yeah. Well, I think so. Here's another good one. And I always talk about this with my students. I've been talking about it with them for months. And this is, I think, maybe one of the biggest things I've seen from student level to pro, to top pro, that most people don't know how to make songs.
Mhm.
Like they don't understand the actual like format or process. Like, right? Like, okay, so I'm starting. I need to make a song. Well, you need to kind of know what it's supposed to, the goal, right? So that's why I say, you're starting from the end almost in a way and building backwards. So the goal is 3.5 minutes, B flat, chill out. Okay, so I need sections in that song, right? Or I should have sections. I shouldn't just have one long, unrelated thing unless that's the whole goal of it. But people don't know song form, right? Do you ever study song form?
yeah.
You do. Because you're somebody who's trying to educate yourself on the whole process, right? So I think a lot of my guys are like, so I say, okay, what section's happening here? How many bars is that? What section is then should happen here? Based on our previous, this went verse, chorus, pre-chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, hook. What should happen after that? Oh, another verse. Okay. So if that verse comes, then what should happen after the verse based on what we wrote? Pre-chorus. Then what? Chorus. Then what? Hook. Then what? Bridge. I mean, that's a kind of a standard format. But at the same time, the more you start to look at those things, the more you realize how much music you have to make for each section. That's kind of how I look at it too. Although working on video games is very different from that, working in song forms makes sense to do that. Like, you need sections, you need form, you need something to tell the listener your story. The listener needs form, the listener needs repetition, the listener needs things that they can relate to. If you don't give them that, unless you're deliberately trying to create a feeling of uneasiness or unsettled, whatever, like a movie score or TV or a particular section in a video game, you're going to lose their attention, right? You need to create things for them to hold on to. So understanding different song forms and how they work and studying the forms of songs is a great thing. Like every songwriting book will tell you to like, steal your favorite song and rewrite the lyrics. That's cool. Then rewrite the melody. That's cool. Then rewrite the chords. That's cool. Well, by that time you have a new song. It's totally unrelated to the song, but you kept the form, right? So the form was one thing that just kind of got you through. So if you already know, it's like, okay, well, I need 8 bars of this. I need 4 bars of that. I need 8 bars of this. I need 16 of this. I need 12 of that. It's going to help you because now you're looking at it as more of like, almost like a puzzle you're putting together, right?
Yeah.
At least that's how I do it in my head. So instead of thinking of like whatever, I'm thinking of it as sections. All right, so I need an instrumental hook thing here happening. and I need this synth to be really cool and really attractive to the ear. And I also need to make sure that it's not, the accompaniment of it is not so busy that it takes away from the synth, because that's my focal point for that section. Then for this section, I want the focal point to be nothing. I want this to just be a build or whatever, you know, because I realize people are doing lots of different, not just top 40 music. They're doing different kinds of songs. But there's a lot of things that I think the production is secondary to the song every time. Right? So in your instrumental music, it's hard because we can't sing the lyrics away from it. There aren't any lyrics. If there are lyrics and we take away all the production, is the song still good? Mm-hmm. And if the answer is yes, then we know we got something. If the answer is no, then we're building a foundation on, or we're building our house on a weak foundation. Yeah. Right? If the song's amazing, well, great. So there's a lot of tips and a lot of things that you want to kind of, I think, put in your head. That's why it sounds very heady, because it really is. Musically, have I told you what to do musically? Not so much. Can I tell you how to make a great melody? It's not an easy thing to explain, you know, as some of these other things are. That's something you'd have to study for a long time. And then also a style of, if you love melody, do you love John Lennon melody, Paul McCartney melody? Do you love Avicii melody? Do you love, you know what I mean? What are we talking about? Do you love Willie Nelson melody? There's a lot of options there. Ryan Tedder, Neo, Max Martin, Taylor, whoever, right? So there's a lot of nuances there, but I think eliminating things leads you closer to being able to make those decisions. Because it's really, for me, making songs is just a process of decision making at this point. It's easier for me because I've learned how to execute most of what I need to execute. There are challenges that are new. Like I can't talk a lot about it, but I can talk some about this video game that I'm working on called Empire of Sin. It's coming out later this year. Romero Games, Brenda Romero, John Romero, both fairly well-known names in the video game industry. John is really well-known for creating the game Doom, Wolfenstein, Quake. He created all those back in the 90s. And Brenda created a ton of games, the Wizardry series, the Jagged Alliance, a couple of those games. She worked on one of the Def Jam games, Def Jam Icon. Playboy the Mansion, that's a good one. But they're actually making a game now that's based in 1920s Prohibition Chicago.
I've seen the image all the on music, your page.
Yeah.
Funny thing, I just want to throw in for you. I was telling you I do my Berkeley class, and they were kind of asking me what I was doing. I told them I was talking to you, and I brought up your website, and this picture came up for Empire of Sin. It's all it is, just the image. And I was like, even this suggests a lot of things. There's a lot of things you can't do in this. You can't have say like a very modern genre maybe for this. Or
how about a synth?
Yeah, right. Like
a synth is probably not going to fit.
There's a lot of questions have been answered for you just by looking at this image.
Absolutely. Well, and they gave me as much background information as they could until they had announced the trailer at, was it E3 last year? Mm-hmm. I think it was E3. They did during the Nintendo Switch. They played the trailer, and I was like, holy wow, this is awesome. Because I hadn't even seen anything yet.
Yeah.
I was already, working on the game, but what I sent them, I was doing with just in my mind what I thought things should be based off descriptions.
Right.
And those descriptions, were like, okay, that's kind of vague. And I did a bunch of music, and I did a whole bunch of demos, in fact. And none of those demos, I think, maybe with the exception of one or two, are going to fit, right? So it was more like I needed more information to really get in there. With a video game, it's very different. So as opposed to an artist, I'm trying to get into the game designer's head. I'm trying to figure out where they're at, what they're doing, and also the level of the game designer. So John Romero is probably one of the most famous game designers ever, or most well known. He's going to have an idea what he's doing and what he wants. I don't need to offer a lot of input. I need to try to get as much information out of somebody like him as possible in order to better guide what I need to do to, make him say, oh, this is great stuff. And it took me a long time. Even with him, he gave certain directions. He didn't give other directions. So I'm like, all right, so I got to try to get in his head as best I can. But I also got to trust the fact this guy knows exactly what he wants. Right. So another game I'm working on, totally unrelated, it's a game called The Crimson Diamond. And it is based... It's basically a retro throwback, 1988 text parser game, Sierra style. If you played any of the games like Laura Bow, Colonel's Bequest, or King's Quest, or Space Quest, Quest for Glory, the early ones were all text-based. So you type in the words and say open door and press enter, and they open it, whatever. So that's a completely different animal. And there's no dialogue, there's no modern sounding things at all. You're completely trying to recreate something that would perfectly live and fit in 1987, 1988, 1989 PC game. And so that I'm using exclusively one sound box called the Roland MT32, which is a dated piece of hardware, and even better, dude, it predates General MIDI. So it's completely unwieldy to use.
I bet.
It's not like analog gear is cool because they have control voltage, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of like predated MIDI. It was their way of controlling and sequencing things. And a lot of people love the way analog sounds, so there have been a lot of modern iterations and recreations of control voltage controllers and things to program them. Nobody cares about pre-General MIDI. General MIDI was a standard that basically standardized the instruments and the volumes and things like that. So that patch 0 was always a grand piano. Patch 128, I think, is a gunshot, or patch 127 is a gunshot noise. No matter which instrument box you're using, that if they support General MIDI, those numbers would correspond to those sounds. They sound different, but those would be the sounds. The MT32 predates that. So it has no standard. None of the DAWs really support it natively. I found an old INS definition that does work in the modern Cakewalk, that does support the actual names for the MT32. But I'm using, I don't know, this is probably not something a lot of the music guys would know, but I'm using DOSBox, which is an emulator for Microsoft Disk Operating System, or MS-DOS, which was early. Then I'm running Windows. You remember it?
In
you
school, like as a kid, I think we did DOS programming at one point, and
QBasic or something like that, or
it was
Turbo Pascal or
rough.
C or one of those.
Yeah.
One of those languages.
C.
So anyway,
yeah.
well, that's the command prompt. Yeah,
That's
now
the
you're
command
typing in stuff in DOS, right?
Yeah.
You CD this to change directory. And I loved it. I played a million games on PC back in the day. If you look behind me, for those that aren't watching, those are a whole bunch of PC games, big box PC games from back in the day, from the 90s and 80s and early 2000s. But then I'm running Windows 3.1 in DOSBox. This is all emulated.
Yeah.
And Windows 3.1 has an LA Synth librarian software. And LA Synth is linear architecture, which was the king of that. Probably was the Roland D50, if you know that keyboard.
Yeah, I've got
which is a really great keyboard.
The modern kind of reissue, the boutique
the
of it.
DO5.
Yes.
And I think that's a nice instrument.
Fantasia.
It's right.
Yeah.
Fantasia. There's a bunch of famous sounds in there, but the MT32 is like a really, really stripped down consumer version with 0 onboard programming controls other than the volume. I'm not even sure you can change the reverb from it. You can't program anything on the unit. It has to all be done via MIDI, but it's not General MIDI. It's pre-General MIDI, so system exclusive MIDI messages, which is really ugly and hairy. Anyway, there's librarian software that's in Windows 3.1 that I'm using to get other patches to play in the MT32. It's really, really annoying and clunky, but it's perfectly authentic to the sound that we want for the game, right? It fits exactly.
Yeah,
because if I was to use
great
modern synths, oh, you heard it?
I heard you had it somewhere.
Yeah, there's the theme. That's like the main theme from the song.
It sounds incredible. It's
Thank you.
It's like the real thing.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's supposed to transport you to 1988.
Yeah.
Right? And I did some modern mixing tricks, but I didn't do much. I just did some little compression and some overall mastering EQ because there's this big retro push with everything, with everybody's playing the Super Nintendo Mini Classic and the Genesis Classic Mini and all these things. And there's this push to hear retro, but I think a lot of times the nostalgia factor with music is we want to hear music that sounds like we remember it sounding as opposed to what it actually sounded like. Uh-huh. You know what I mean? Like we have in our mind how amazing it was, but then if you go back and listen to the real thing, sometimes it's like, well, is that how it sounded? I remember it sounding way bigger and better when I was a kid. Yeah. So I'm trying to toe the line there, right? I'm trying to toe the line between capturing the nostalgia with an authentic instrument, but also giving you a touch of the modern, so it doesn't sound like you're not getting hanging note bugs and what's the other parts of it? Like it doesn't get too quiet in a part or too loud in a part all of a sudden, and there's all these like problems that you never remembered, like or missing notes, or if you're playing like the regular NES, when you jump, you're losing half the polyphony of the soundtrack, things like that. So you're trying to create. I'm trying to be authentic. I think you're limited to 8 instruments, so I'm not trying to add to that. I don't think you need a lot more to get that authentic sound, but I'm also trying to be sneaky about touching it up where I can.
But that fits into what you're saying too about getting things done. If you allowed yourself unlimited tracks and every other tool in the book, because you can get some pretty convincing VSTs or whatever you want nowadays that most people are gonna not know the difference, but by doing that it helps your process. I mean, maybe not the whole struggling to fight against the pre-MIDI stuff.
No, that's not fun. But it's just like, I just feel like it's going to add authenticity, and it's going to add, if nothing else, it'll add like me being able to give a lecture on that awful subject at one point or another.
There you go.
Somebody suggested to me, hey, you should do a talk at GDC. GDC is like the Game Developer Conference. First of all, I haven't been in game development very long at all, if you even want to call it that, because I'm so peripheral to the actual development process. I've never sat in an office. I've never seen crunch. I just know about it. But I am a fan of the games, obviously, that's how we know each other. But I have known them since I was a kid and always have taken an interest to the music side of things, and just, plunged myself into studying everything I could about it, not sitting in an office every day with a game development team, to understand the process and what my role was supposed to be. Because what I understand is how to make songs, how to make music. What I didn't understand is what does the developer actually need me to deliver? What's the product that they're asking me to make, really? Because a lot of times now you have this thing called adaptive music. You know about adaptive music?
Yeah, would that be kind of like Breath of the Wild?
Yeah, that's a good example.
Where the music kind of evolves as you walk around.
Yeah, and it started way before. I mean, it's from, I think they had adaptive music in the early 90s. It just, when you move somewhere, something changes. The easiest way to describe it is like, you're walking along, an enemy is nearby. So the music or the score or the sounds change. Then the enemy you're in a caution stage. You're getting real close. Then they see you. You're in an alert stage. Then you're in combat. And all of these things could be built in layers and loops where they're just playing and responding to the game itself, right? So it's not just linear music, which is what we do. We start at this point, we end at this point, right? So that's kind of a nuance that I had to study. I had no clue about a year and a half ago. And I just I bought Udemy courses. I talked to people, and thankfully Brenda Romero was like a mentor to me. She was giving me advice on watch this, study that, read this, which is an amazing resource. She's a great person. I actually got to bring them. We did a concert with Sean Paul in the UK, and I got to bring the whole family. So I said, yeah, come. They're like, wait, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, why not?
Cool.
We have an open guest list in this city. We don't know anybody here. So come, you'll have the whole run. You can come backstage. They came to the sound check, take pictures. So for them, it was like a treat. For me, that's a daily life, right? That's what I know. That's my business. But she's also been a huge resource on the whole industry, saying, hey, do this. Yeah, that's not such a great idea. Don't stay away from that. It's like, oh, follow this person, but make sure this person's advice might be a little bit dated. So don't deal with that, and just kind of guiding me almost like an education that I could never have gotten anywhere else. So I was fortunate to kind of become friends with her through actually video game collecting. What else? And, that's been a real treat. So I've gotten probably an unfair education in video games and video game industry and music, and from somebody that's been in the industry since, the early 80s, which is
that's great.
Mostly the entirety of the industry, right?
Yeah, to have that too, because there's the same problem in learning. There's so much information. Where do you even start? Same thing we have in music. To have someone to guide you. I think
you're a teacher, right? So you got to ask. Your students should be coming to you and asking questions. You're the guy who's supposed to kind of say, well, I can't tell you how to do it exactly, but I can show you pieces of the process and show you where maybe not to go. So you're kind of speeding up their own process. Because at the end of the day, if they're not motivated to learn, it doesn't matter what you show them.
Yeah, without the curiosity, it's...
Yeah. But you can also steer them in the right direction and steer them away from things that maybe for a fact are going to take away from what they're trying to do.
Right.
So, yeah, man, those are the kind of things that, listen, all this stuff excites me. Whether you're doing a record just you solo, whether you're doing a record with a whole bunch of musicians, whether you're hiring an orchestra, all these things I try to study. And at the end of the day, this is what I say to people all the time. I'm like, dude, I'm a student the same way you are. Like, I'm trying to study this stuff, man. I feel like I know nothing still.
Yeah.
I know a lot, yet I know nothing.
I keep learning about how much I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And listen, that's why I listen to your podcast, because I'm trying to learn something.
That's why
I'm hoping your
doing
cats are
it.
teaching.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, and they are teaching me.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about all this stuff and give some perspective. I know you want to put the baby to bed, right? So
I do.
let's not take that from you. But Dan, thanks so much. And we tell people they can go to DanTheBand.com.
You could go to DanTheBand.com. I'm on Twitter at DanTheBand. The only problem is I can't get the Instagram. I'm at DanTheBand NYC on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I can't get the YouTube for some dang reason either. I've emailed the guy that has them, and he just not a fan of mine. So it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that happened.
And I was nice about it.
With Brian Funk on YouTube, and there's like a guy.
Somebody had it.
He's got like one video from like 1987.
This guy has 2 videos, I think, and they're 20 years old and or whatever, 15 years old, and nobody's watched them.
Yeah.
And
what are you gonna do?
It is what it is.
Yeah, they'll find you.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks so much, man. And I wish you the best, and with everything, with the touring and all that. I look forward to seeing like your work in the games. And
well, the games I can guarantee is stuff that's happening. The touring, as far as the future of that is concerned, I have no idea, man. I'm just as clueless as anybody else. I wonder if touring will resume, if borders are going to be still open the way they were before this. There's a whole lot of unanswered questions there.
We might be going into a totally new world moving forward.
Well, I think we are. I put something on my Twitter the day Broadway closed, and I was like, guys, the music business changed today. Whether we know it or not, it changed. How? I don't know, but I know it's not going to just go back to business as usual in a month or two.
No.
But I can't tell you what it's going to go to. I hope for the best for all of us.
Yes, me too. Me too. Maybe something good will come out of it. We'll figure something new out. And
Well, I think some good things are already coming out of it. Like I'm watching certain people do certain things that they never had the time to do, and it's like, wow. My wife watched a concert of a friend of ours, 2 hours. She watched the entire live stream. It was just him and his guitar and singing.
yeah,
And she watched the whole thing and loved it. Like it was great. It was like made her Friday night,
that's cool. Yeah.
So, and I think she said he's on again tonight, so she's going to watch it.
I was watching a video last night before bed of John Fogerty sitting outside in his yard playing some songs acoustic. I was like, this is great.
Yeah.
I mean,
And they said Elton John's going to do one
yeah, cool.
from his house. Like,
wow.
when are you going to get the opportunity
Brian
to see
Wilson was
things
doing
like
it
that?
too, and it's just
Brian Wilson was doing it?
yeah.
Oh,
Rolling
man.
Stone has this thing called "In My Room," I guess after Brian Wilson's song, and he's at the piano. I mean, he's getting up there, but I mean, there's still that youth and genius. Exactly, it's there. It's nice. It's
Paul McCartney thought of him as what I think he said one time that he thought "God Only Knows" was the best pop song ever written.
Pet
That's coming
Sounds
from-
is one of my favorite records ever.
That's coming from the guy with the most #1 songs ever.
You can't argue
So-
that. I mean, that's a beautiful song.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
I may not always love you is the first line, but then he changes it and makes it, as long as there are stars above you.
Crazy.
I love that. Yeah, that's one of my favorite records ever. Beautiful.
Harmonically, too.
Yeah.
Good luck. I still couldn't tell you the proper harmony for that song.
Yeah. Well, it's something else. We're lucky to have that. It's had some time to listen to it, I guess.
Definitely, man.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan, very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Check out DanTheBand.com and DanTheBand everywhere except, I guess, YouTube.
Yeah,
But you got
thank
some
guys for
videos, too,
listening.
by the way, that people should check out. Some about finishing songs, and it's cool. So that's
Yeah, I
something
haven't
nice.
had a chance to put up a lot there. It's just tough to find time to do it with the scheduling. But
Yeah.
as this thing has changed, I'm going to be doing this live streaming composing for this video game next week.
Oh, cool. Yeah, let me know.
Hopefully, I don't think the podcast will come out before then, but
I can make that happen.
oh, you're that quick?
I'm the
Dang.
guy in charge.
So it's Tuesday, the 31st of March, 2020. We're going to be doing it on Julia Minamata's YouTube channel. That's JuliaMinamata. Or you can find it on my Twitter. The Crimson Diamond is the name of the video game. And we're going to be doing some either live composing or game audio asset.
Awesome.
We're going to listen through assets. It should be pretty fun. We did a test the other night and it went pretty well, and it's actually really enjoyable. It's like
Yeah, I'd like to
it's
see
cool
that.
to be able to it's cool to be able to interact with people like as we're doing it. I don't know if they're going to influence it, but at least it'll be cool to interact with people doing it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll tune in for that.
Cool. And let people see a part of the process that you would never see. Like if you work at a AAA game studio, you're going to be under an NDA, which means you can't share any of this information.
yeah.
You can't share. This is a solo dev. She's responsible for all of it. She wants to do it. So it's great. It's great advertising for us, and it's a great opportunity to kind of share with the people, part of the
Nice.
process you can't really
That's
see.
super
So,
cool. Cool. Yeah, I want to see that. That's awesome.
awesome.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good night.